first sitting president to do so. We start with some breaking news from the US. President Donald Trump says Iran has asked for a ceasefire. In a social media post, he said Washington will consider when Hormuz Strait is open, free and clear. Until then, US forces are blasting Iran into oblivion or, as they say, back to the Stone Ages. We have correspondents in Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, Tehran and the White House, where we start with our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher. Alan, once again, this is diplomacy over Truth Social. It's almost a hallmark of this particular Donald Trump presidency. But is there any indication of who Donald Trump thinks he's talking to?
In the past, he said that he is speaking to the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament. You remember that last week he said that they wanted to know the credibility and power of the person that they were having conversations with, and they asked for a present, which was to allow 10 oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without any interference, and that actually happened. The ships were flagged with the Pakistani flag. That gave Donald Trump, he told us, the media, the feeling that the person that they were speaking to was credible and was powerful enough to deliver on a ceasefire. He's been talking about how he wants to end the war in the next couple of weeks. He is to make a primetime address in just about 11 hours. The feeling is on Tuesday that he was going to announce an end to the fighting. Now, I've been speaking to people late on Tuesday, early on Wednesday, and they said they didn't feel that was the case. What Donald Trump is likely to do is to say that the war will take another couple of weeks, that he understands the financial pain that people are feeling because of higher fuel prices and all the things that that has knock-on effects to. But he believes that it is just a short-term pain for the long-term gain of a no-nuclear Iran. And so he is pushing that idea, and he'll do it in prime time. But whether or not there is actually a ceasefire on the table, Donald Trump says there is. We have to take the president at face value. And he says in that tweet, that in that message on Truth Social, that until the Strait of Hormuz is open, free and clear, they'll continue blasting Iran into oblivion, which is certainly a huge flag to suggest that he's not about to announce the end of the war in about 11 hours' time.
Alan, stay there. We're going to come back to you, but let's go to Ali Hashim in Tehran. Where is the Iranian leadership response here? You've been speaking to people. They've poured scorn over this?
Well, yeah, we spoke to an official, and he said clearly that Iran denies that they've asked for, requested any ceasefire. And the only thing that comes to mind is President Masoud Pezeshkian's stances today while speaking to the chairman of the European Council, when he said that Iran, let me just read from the accurate line, that Iran is ready to end the war with resolve. However, this should happen by meeting the guarantees that this is not going to recur once again. And this is the official line that's been said over the past weeks. And we had yesterday Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, speaking to Tehran bureau chief, Al Jazeera's Tehran bureau chief, telling him that Iran is not looking for a ceasefire, it's looking for an end of this war. And they've been repeating this several times, and they've also repeated that they are ready for a long war of attrition, a war that is at least 6 months, and they want all the other fronts to end together. So they have their own long list of requests before reaching a ceasefire. Actually, a ceasefire from an Iranian point of view doesn't serve Iran, because it opens the chance for the freedom of action for Israel and the United States, and this can be repeated anytime. What the Iranians want is an end, and a complete end, with finishing, let me say, finalizing all the files, the nuclear file, the sanctions, and getting back to the normal situation of a state that doesn't have to go through all what it went through. Also, this is not only Iran's issue. There's another issue we have to take into consideration: regional stability. If this is not going to end with a clear picture, with a clear agreement. How are the countries in the region going to deal with the new situation? What's going to be the fate of the Strait of Hormuz? We know the situation right now, it's closed. So there are many issues on this list, and it cannot end this simply.
Now, that's Ali Hashim. Stay there. He's live for us in Tehran. We're going to go to Alan Fisher, who's in the White House for us. Now, Donald Trump has been talking up all the prospects of the war ending in 2 to 3 weeks. But he's also said, deal or not, it's irrelevant. And now he's going to make this primetime address. You talked about it earlier. This primetime address, this has to be the beginning of the end of the war, do we think?
Well, look, there's a couple of things to point out. Donald Trump will claim victory. That was always going to be on the cards. He's going to point to the military successes that the United States have had, and there have been successes. They've effectively destroyed the Iranian Navy, they've destroyed the Air Force, they have military superiority. There are no air defences left operating in Iran that we can tell. They've damaged the ballistic missile program, they've damaged the drone program as well. The problem they've had, of course, is getting oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and that has a huge economic impact. But Donald Trump also promised that there would be regime change, that they would be different from the lunatics in Tehran that were there before, the madmen, the religious crazies, as he's described them in the past as well. And just in that Truth Social post, we see a change in tone. We heard it from Pete Hegseth when he spoke on Tuesday, but the president now is saying that the government there is much less radicalised and far more intelligent, suggesting these are people we can do business with. If I reach a deal with them, then that would be a good thing. We can deal with them going forward. They're not kind of closed off. What he hasn't delivered, of course, is the pro-USA regime that he thought he might get. What he hasn't delivered is the uprising that he thought he might get. And we could be in the position where Donald Trump in 2 weeks or so announces the end of the war. But as we've heard many times from Israel, they are not going to end the war. So we could be seeing that the United States will continue to fund Israel. They'll continue to provide weapons to Israel, but they won't be involved in direct conflict over Iran. There is a change of tone, and the change of tone is to make sure that Donald Trump can say, we have a big victory here, and people should celebrate that. But we think it's not going to be tonight when he announces that, and things can change. This is Donald Trump. We've learned a lot over the last 8 years, but that's what we're expecting to hear from him in just over 11 hours' time.
Alan Fisher live for us there from the White House. Let's go back to Ali Hashim, who is in Tehran for us. Ali, the leadership's been absolutely clear. They are not going to negotiate under fire. And in the last part of this Truth Social post, he says, we will continue, if they don't meet our demands, into bombing them into the Stone Age. Those were his exact words. This does not feel like a new round of negotiations. It feels like threats. Do you think?
Well, indeed, and just few minutes ago, to the east of Tehran, it was visible to me from my side, 2 huge explosions, two airstrikes hit the eastern side of the Iranian capital. So still business as usual. Airstrikes going on, nothing has stopped. And the Iranians are aware of this situation. They're aware that they are in the middle of a very bitter war. They say it's not the war of their choice. However, they have to fight it till the end because they know this is now becoming existential for their posture in this region. Now, there's a very huge rift between them and their neighbors in the Gulf. They are in a situation, a very dire economic situation. So this has to come to an end in a way that they know it's not going to be a repeated one, and they know that they can get back to the normality of the past, not the very close past, rather the old past. So what the Iranians are now dealing with is a president in the United States coming out saying, well, they want a ceasefire, I'm going to still hit them till they are destroyed, and then I'll just see if I'm going to give them this. Now they're saying, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to continue this war till the end, until we achieve our objectives. This is what we've heard from the foreign minister and from different other officials, including the commanders in the IRGC, the ones in charge actually of the battle.
That's Ali Hashim live for us in Tehran. Let's bring in Noor Uday, who is following developments in Israel from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. This is going to lay bare the difference between Israel's strategy and the American strategy. Donald Trump simply wants this to be over, and he's almost wishing it into existence, but the Israelis are going to be surprised at the very least about this ceasefire claim.
That's right, Imran. I mean, Israel does not want a ceasefire at this moment, and that's why they tried to accelerate the kind of airstrikes, qualitative airstrikes, done over the past week or so, moving from targeting police stations and checkpoints of the Basij, for example, to more strategic targets like the steel factories, like the pharmaceutical companies that produce cancer treatment and treatment for MS and others, things that would help achieve the goal of not allowing Iran to recover, to stand on its feet if and when the war is over. Now, the other estimation in Israel, the other contingency is if Donald Trump doesn't declare a ceasefire. And the chatter in Israel is if that happens, if all these diplomatic efforts fail, then Israel is ready to escalate and escalate significantly with eyes on Iran's energy resources, on their electricity grids, on their oil production, because that would really be the ultimate goal in the end for Israel, the ultimate way they can live with an end to the war, with Iran reeling from all those strategic blows, notwithstanding the fact that this might have wide-ranging ramifications in the region. The estimate in Israel is that they won't receive the brunt of it.
That's Noor Uday live for us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Now, Paul Musgrove is an associate professor at Georgetown University in Qatar and a US foreign policy analyst, and he joins me in the studio. One of the hallmarks of this presidency right now is diplomacy by Truth Social. It keeps coming, and they contradict each other. He's upended normal diplomatic norms. You're a foreign policy analyst. This makes it incredibly difficult for the negotiators on both sides to try and actually, because you're spending a lot of time deciphering these posts, right, and trying to figure out what the president actually wants. Is that your feeling?
That's absolutely my feeling. One of the hallmarks of President Trump, not just in this term, but in the previous term, has been that he wants to centralize and personalize and deinstitutionalize U.S. foreign policy as much as possible. In a normal, well-functioning, integrated administration, Secretary Rubio's press tour, including on Al Jazeera, talking about the next 4 to 5 weeks would have been the prelude to a renewed round of diplomacy. But for President Trump, every day, he said this to his staff, he wants every day to be an episode of a television series where the attention is on him. This is one way to do it. We're now here talking about his social media posts. He's projecting an image in which the United States is winning, and we're also all waiting for his big speech today to see what he reveals. I think that the one thing that is constant is looking what's going on moment by moment as additional American assets come into this region. And the posts say what they say, but there's still a lot of potential boots on the ground coming here into the Arabian Gulf.
Stay there. We will come back to you in just a moment. But let's bring in Abbas Aslani, who's a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies in Tehran. We have this Truth Social post. It says that Iran has asked for a ceasefire, that the regime has changed, and that this is now the new reality. But then it also threatens Iran as well. What's your feeling? What's your take here? Is the US actually talking to somebody in Iran that would have said this in the situation that we're in right now?
Well, this is somehow a surprise to everybody I'm talking to here in Tehran, and Trump saying that Iran has requested ceasefire, and this is something which can hear from Trump, that not by day, but hour by hour he's saying something else, and he's shifting goalposts. And this indicates that Iran's trust and mistrust toward the United States increases, and this feels uncertainty about what can be the future trajectory. And I think by the time that the hostility is ongoing, there will be no negotiations between the two sides. And maybe this is a kind of indication that he's willing to end this war, in one way without, getting any agreement with Iran, without holding any negotiations. But, we can expect everything from Trump, in the hours to come, he might be saying something different, maybe engaging in a new round of escalation against Iran. So we cannot count on what he is saying. So that's why this has made it even more complicated to, predict how future will unfold. But at least what we can say is that, the days to come or hours to come, at least in a week or two, we can get a better understanding that what the future trajectory would be.
I want to come back to Paul here. Paul, one of the big problems that I've been told by US diplomats is that US diplomacy is simply not trusted. That was reiterated by Abbas Araghchi on Al Jazeera, where he says there is zero trust. How do you change that if you are going to get to a ceasefire?
One of the ways that you would try to change that is by engaging in confidence-building measures. Face-to-face or some sort of gesture within this conflict, you'd want to make sure that both sides can rebuild a foundation of trust. That's going to be difficult in this case because the United States and Iran over the past year, every time the United States and Iran have sat down, there's been an escalation to war. One way of looking at President Trump's Truth Social statement would be to look at it as more a conveyance of the threat and a justification for the American people to say that if the Iranians are sitting down, as he claims, that this would be a reason that if those talks fall through or if they're rejected, that the United States would be justified in further escalation. We just heard from Noor O'Day talking about this as being a potential Israeli rationale for further escalation. But to get back to trust, you have to have some reason for both sides to actually believe what the other is saying. And if it's very difficult, if the person making the ultimate decisions is not restrained by anything but his own impulses, or as he once said, his own thoughts and feelings, then it's very hard to rebuild that trust. And even in a war, sides should be able to trust each other, but we don't have that right now.
Stay there. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. I want to go back to Abbas Aslani. Abbas, there is a president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. He is in that position, yet Donald Trump seems to be hinting that he perhaps is not in that position. In your experience, the Iranians, are they united? Are they unified?
Well, what we have been seeing from the Iranian elites in the country, even from different factions, not the conservatives alone, but the reformists, and those who have been critical of the political establishment, or those even who attended the protests in the country, a few weeks ago, they also support the country against the foreign aggression. And we have been seeing that this rally around the flag being witnessed in the country. Iran is exhibiting, unity as well as no sign of weakness or surrender. So that's strange that Trump is, making these remarks, talking about maybe new authorities in the country, or Iran asking for ceasefire. This does not align with the situation here in Tehran and the country. And that's why I think this is somehow strange to hear those words from Trump. However, it can be expected from Trump, who has been, saying contradictory things and making contradictory remarks in the past. He is, making those statements based on the that very moment that he feels. But at least this indicates that he has not been able strategically to achieve the outcomes that initially were announced as the regime change, then bringing instability and chaos to the country, or maybe disintegrating Iran, as well as, in the end, he wanted to reopen the Strait of Hormuz that was very wide open before this aggression, started. And it seems that he is even thinks that engaging in a new round of, military conflict by land could bring more complexities by trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And this is why I think this has created a sense of confusion back in the United States, resulting and leading to these, contradictions.
Abbas Aslani, Paul Musgrave, thank you very much. We will pick these up in the coming hours. A lot of confusion coming certainly from Donald Trump's Truth Social post. Now, Iran has fired missiles towards Israel, injuring at least 25 people. The Israeli ambulance service say a cluster munition hit multiple sites in and around Tel Aviv. Health officials say children are amongst the injured. Nida Ibrahim reports from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
An Iranian cluster munition shattered a long pause. It had been 19 hours of relative silence from Iran, but at 7 a.m. local time, a fragmenting war had struck nearly a dozen sites in its central region. In Bnei Brak, east of Tel Aviv, several people were injured. The missile caused major damage to homes and buildings. And Israeli media say at least 100 people were forced to evacuate their homes.
The Psychological Flexibility Unit is currently working to provide treatment and evacuation for those suffering from psychological trauma and panic attacks. We're still conducting search operations.
Further attacks from Iran continued on Wednesday morning. At one point, sirens blasted across nearly all of Israel, warning of coordinated attacks from Hezbollah and Iran. Some missiles targeted military bases near Tel Aviv, while others were fired towards southern Israel. Estimates suggest that Hezbollah launched 50 rockets and drones against northern Israel in 24 hours. Yemen's Ansarullah al-Houthi group also fired a missile into southern Israel. The Israeli army says it was intercepted. Tuesday is the eve of the Jewish holiday of Passover, and Israeli sources expect Iran and Hezbollah to increase their pressure on the ground. Politically, as the US president hints at a potential end to the war, the Israeli prime minister seems to be preparing for that scenario as well. Netanyahu delivered a short speech to the Israeli public, hailing what he called success of the Iran war.
We have broken the power of Iran's terror squads that surrounded us in a choke ring. It's true, they still have a limited capacity to threaten us, but they can no longer threaten our existence or launch tens of thousands of ballistic missiles and rockets intended to destroy the cities of Israel.
This is far from ideal for a man who's made a career lobbying against Iran's threats, and a leader who had promised to dismantle the regime and stop these threats for good.
Netanyahu delivered his 1,000-arrogant speech, claiming, "I changed the Middle East." There was one word missing from that speech: almost. You almost changed the Middle East. In the end, it always turns out that it hasn't changed.
Many see Netanyahu's speech as a political move. He managed to secure his coalition government's survival until the end of its term later this year. But if the war stops now, and with the continued Israeli casualties in southern Lebanon, Netanyahu might have a hard time selling this as a victory, and his push to stay in power could take a hit. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, occupied West Bank, Palestine.
A tanker leased by Qatar Energy has been damaged off the coast of Qatar after being hit by a projectile. The British Maritime Monitoring Agency, the incident happened about 30 kilometres north of the industrial city of Ras Laffan. And there have been more Israeli strikes on villages in southern Lebanon. Israeli forces are expanding their attacks in the region as they continue to occupy the area. Israel's defense minister has said all houses in the villages near the border in Lebanon will be destroyed, quote, in accordance with the model of Rafah and Beit Hanun in Gaza. Zaina Khuda reports from Beirut.
Israeli forces have invaded southern Lebanon, and Defense Minister Israel Katz says they won't leave, even after the current war with Hezbollah has ended. And while Israel's army says it is not operating against UN peacekeepers, the Lebanese military, or civilians, it has targeted an army position, killed many civilians, and called on UN forces to avoid combat zones that residents were told to leave. The mandate of the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, ends this year after decades, largely due to Israeli pressure.
The Israel Defense Forces are in control of substantial areas immediately north of the Blue Line. The civilian suffering from the hostilities continues to mount. UNIFIL, on the ground carrying out its mission given by this council, has now also suffered fatalities.
The UN is still investigating the incidents, but it says the situation in Lebanon has dangerously deteriorated with the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel has been trying to empty the area south of the Litani, and Lebanese officials are denouncing Israel's new occupation of the area.
We call upon this council to act immediately and to condemn these statements clearly and explicitly, and to take the necessary measures to compel Israel to halt its incursions and withdraw its forces to internationally recognized borders.
Israel occupied southern Lebanon for 18 years before withdrawing in 2000.
Israel's offensive against Hezbollah has no front line. Israel's airstrikes have again targeted the Lebanese capital. In a letter to the UN Security Council, the government in Beirut asked the international community to secure a clear commitment from Israel to stop all attacks across the country.
Israel says it won't stop, and it is also refusing the Lebanese government's offer to hold direct negotiations. It wants Hezbollah to disarm and is pressuring the state to enforce its decision to ban the group's military wing. The army is reluctant to do so in a time of war, with the defense minister warning Israel's plans are, quote, a deepening of its aggression against Lebanon. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK will not take part in the war on Iran. It comes as the Daily Telegraph newspaper reports that Donald Trump has told it that he is considering pulling out of NATO. In an address to the nation, Starmer said the UK is pushing for diplomacy to end the conflict in the Middle East.
This is not our war. We will not be drawn into the conflict. That is not in our national interest. And the most effective way we can support the cost of living in Britain is to push for de-escalation in the Middle East and a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is such a vital route for energy. To that end, we're exploring each and every diplomatic avenue that is available to us.
Now let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories. The Supreme Court will hear arguments over President Donald Trump's executive order seeking to end automatic birthright citizenship. The president is expected to attend the hearing, potentially becoming the first sitting president to do so. Now, Trump signed an executive order aimed at ending birthright citizenship just hours after taking office in January 2025. Currently, anyone who's born in the United States is an American citizen. Trump is seeking to restrict that right for some people. The citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868 in the aftermath of the Civil War. It ended slavery and overturned a Supreme Court decision that had ruled people of African descent could not be US citizens. Now, for more on this, let's speak to Patty Culhane, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. What is the importance of the arguments that we're going to be hearing today at the Supreme Court?
Well, it's hugely important. It's fundamentally possibly going to change the nature of what it means to be an American. As you mentioned, this came about after the Civil War because they wanted the amendment says that basically if you're born here, then you're an American citizen. Now, how is the Trump administration trying to get around that? Because 128 years ago, this very court said that, in fact, if you are born here, then you are a citizen. Well, the Trump administration is right now arguing before the court a couple of things. They say the clause that it's that's subject to the jurisdiction. They're saying because people are born to illegal or undocumented migrants, that they are not allegiant to the United States. That's going to be a bit of a tough pull, I think, from what the justice has been saying. The other thing they're pointing out is in the past Supreme Court case, 128 years ago, the parents of the immigrant in question were here legally. So that is something that some Republican scholars are really pointing to and hoping that the justices who consider themselves originalists will believe that that is in fact what the court 128 years ago meant to say.
Now, Patty, the potential appearance of President Donald Trump is unprecedented. Why would he bother going to effectively a hearing?
Well, because he likes to turn about precedent. As you can see, there's a very vocal, very somewhat large protest going on behind me. A lot of signs against President Trump. We do know that he has arrived. We did see him. He went in through the back door. Reporters didn't see him go in, but apparently he's sitting in the public section. He was giving comments just last night, and he said, look, Democratic justices never rule against Democratic presidents. That, in fact, is not true. But he was very disappointed because Republican justices, some appointed by him, ruled against him on tariffs, which he said was the biggest decision that the court had ever made, obviously without evidence. So I think he's probably hoping that by sitting here, breaking the precedent of sending a message, that perhaps he can influence the justices. Not usually how that works, but again, we've never had this happen before.
That's Patty Culhane live for us in Washington, D.C. Now, India has begun its long-delayed population count. It's a census that could reshape welfare programs, political representation across the whole country. The nationwide exercise was originally scheduled for 2021, but it was delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic and logistical hurdles. Now, the last census in 2011 recorded a population of 1.21 billion. That figure is now estimated to have surged past 1.4 billion. And excitement is building along Florida's Space Coast just hours before NASA's big lunar launch. On Wednesday, 4 astronauts, 3 Americans and 1 Canadian, are set to make history aboard the Artemis II mission. It's the first journey to the moon to carry a crew in more than 50 years. Liftoff is scheduled for 22:24 GMT.